Hi everyone, in this video we are going to be making our second bracelet from the Dollarama Castle Craft bead weaving kit. And the bracelet that we're going to make is this dark colored one that is also on the cover of the packaging. And because this is a predominantly black beaded bracelet, you are going to be able to use the black thread that came with the kit. Because as you remember, we actually ran out of the white thread making this first bracelet. However, I myself will not be using the black thread that came with the kit because I've been wearing the first bracelet for about a week now, and the thread along the edges is starting to fall apart. So it is fraying, it is pilling, and overall looking a bit gnarly. And so that's also what I meant when I said that the outermost threads get the most wear and tear because they are the most exposed and they have the most contact with your wrist. Now, in the last video, I had mentioned that I got these spools of Coats & Clark upholstery thread that is 100% nylon. So this thread is really strong, and because it is bonded nylon, it would not have the same fraying issue that this thread from the kit has. But the only issue with this thread is it is a bit thick. So whereas I think it would work well as a warp thread, so vertical thread, it would not work as well as a weft or horizontal thread because the weft thread has to be thin enough to be able to pass through these smaller size seed beads multiple times. So I actually have another thread that can be used as a horizontal weft thread, and that's these John Bead good threads that I got from Michaels. So I have a white one and a black one. So this thread actually is meant for full-on bead weaving. It says here it's great for loom, herringbone, brick peyote, bead embroidery, and more. I got this actually with a 40% off coupon at Michaels. And each spool has 547 yards or 500 meters. So you actually get a ton of thread. This is a lot of thread, and this will probably last me more than a year, to be honest. Now you can actually also use good thread, not just for the weft, but also for warp. But I also wanted to mention this upholstery thread because this thread comes in more colors than the bead weaving thread. So the upholstery thread comes in colors like purple, green, red, blue, grays, and tan. So if you want the thread for your warp that could match your bead colors, then this would also be a good option. But for today's project, I have this idea of using both this thicker upholstery thread and this thinner bead weaving thread. So let's get started. Alright, so let's count out how many strands of warp threads we're going to need to put on for this bracelet. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 beads in a row for this bracelet. So that means that we need to put on 8 vertical warp strands onto the loom to make the 7 spaces that we're going to need for the 7 beads in a row for this bracelet. So my idea is that I want to use this thicker white upholstery thread doubled up for the leftmost and the rightmost vertical warp strands. And then for the middle vertical strands, I'm going to be using this black bead weaving thread. And I'm also going to be using this black bead weaving thread for the horizontal weft. Okay, so to put this thread on, I'm going to tie 2 knots over here, and they're just going to be regular knots. So I'm going to tie 1 knot, and and another knot to secure the first knot. And then, because I'm going to need 8 strands and I want to center my piece on the loom, I'm going to count from the middle, and it's going to be 4 strands to the left and 4 to the right. So from the middle, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to put the first strand in that groove, and then I'm going to wind my string around this knob. And then I'm going to go back through the same groove so that I can double this first strand. And then I'm just going to wind it around one more time because I want to actually put the next strand in the 8th slot. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So over here is the 8th slot. So that's going to be the last vertical thread in the bracelet. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So right there. And I'm just going to wind it around again. And I'm going to place it in the same 8th slot and go up. And I'm going to tie this thread. So I'm just going to cut a little bit of extra. And I'm just going to wind it around once and twice and tie a knot. So I'm just going to tie one knot and a second knot. Okay. So the first and the last thread should be secure. And then I'm going to use this black thread to fill in the middle. So I'm going to tie a knot and another one. So 2 knots. So I'm going to go around. But this spool is actually too big to go through this middle spot. So I'm just going to estimate how much thread I'm going to need and then cut it off and then put the warp on that way. And the way I'm going to estimate that is by just running the spool back and forth the number of times that I'm going to need this for and then giving it extra. So right now this is 2, so I'm just going to go, okay, I'm going to need that much for 3 and then 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I'm going to give it like a little extra like that. So hopefully that's going to be enough to get the job done. Once I reach the halfway point, I'm going to wind it around the other knob so that it'll be more even. Alright, so I've done all the middle warps with the black threads. I'm going to go ahead and tie this off by also winding it around a couple times. And tying it off a couple times. Alright, so I've just finished warping all of my required threads. So there's 1, I'm going to count this double warp thread as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 threads and 7 spaces for the 7 beads in the row that we're going to be putting on from this pattern right there. So the issue right now is that, I don't know if you can see, but this thread is super loose. So I'm gonna do my little trick of shoving a pencil through this end so that I can stretch the thread a little bit and give it some tension. So I'm going to take a really strong, really thick needle, not your beading needle, a really thick needle, and I'm going to just pull this out a little bit so that I can stick my Sharpie in there. And then I'm gonna do this side. Just pull that out a little bit and don't poke yourself. So let me just do that. And just wiggle my Sharpie in there. So now you can see that my thread is stretched out and it is quite tight, it's quite taut and has a good bounce to it, so it's not just flopping around all over the place. So this is actually a good tension to start the project. So let's take a look at the colors that we're going to need for this project. We're going to need white, aquamarine, pink, black, and gold. And again, when you're putting down your beads, I highly recommend some sort of fabric or other surface that can prevent your beads from rolling away. So what I have right here is actually a bead mat. Alright, so hopefully you were able to go out and get yourself a size 10 beading needle, which would make this loom working a lot more of a pleasant experience. And also it's worth mentioning again that for this particular kind of loom work, we want to try to pick out even-sized beads, and I'm gonna show you an example again. So here are some white beads from the pile below, and as you can see, they're all different sizes. So you've got this squarish one, and then this thin one, and then another squarish one, and then a really tiny one, and another thin one, a squarish one, and a really long one, and then another thin one and a squarish one. So for me, I would use just these squarish ones, and I would not use any of the other ones, because to me, the squarish ones are just the easiest to pick out and ensure that the beads are even. And also the squarish ones are the easiest ones for me to have a consistent result with. And so here are the beads that actually match the first row in this pattern. And as you can see, I really tried to pick out the squarish beads across all the different colors. And to me, it just makes it a lot easier to keep the bracelet nice and even. Okay, so now we're ready to tie on a length of thread to begin our looming project. Now, in my previous videos, I showed you how to add thread in the middle of your project in case you ran out of thread in the middle. However, I personally am not fond of running out of thread in the middle of a project. So for a project like this, where I can see that it's only 7 beads in a row, and for my wrist size, I'm only gonna be needing 5 inches of beaded section. I will actually do my best to just use one thread for the whole thing. So I actually cut myself a 9-foot strand of thread. However, you don't have to do that. You can for sure just use 3 to 4 feet of thread at a time, and you can avoid the risk of getting that thread tangled up, and you just have to weave in the tails later on. But I don't really like doing that, so I'm just gonna risk it for the biscuit. So to start this project, I'm just going to leave about 6 inches of tail, and I'm going to tie a knot. So just a simple overhand knot. And as you can see, this is how much tail I left. So that's going to be woven in later on. And I'm going to put the rest of my super long thread under all of the vertical warp threads. And I'm going to put that through my beading needle. Alright, so let's take a look at the first row in the pattern. So that will be gold, black, black, white, black, black, gold. So this is the first row, and I'm going to slide all the beads down. And I am going to position each bead in between each space of my warp threads. So I'm gonna make sure to push your beads up so that you can position your beads in between the warp threads. And then I'm going to put my needle over each of the warp threads and through the beads. So this thread is running under all of these vertical threads. I'm just going to now put my needle over each of the vertical threads and through each of the beads. And whoops, I pulled my beads through. If your beads slip, you can just slide them back into place. They're not going to be secure until after you do a few rows. So right now, there's still a lot of space in between each bead. So I'm just going to do another row, and that should help me tighten all of these vertical strings to the point where the spaces will match the size of the beads. So the next row is gold, black, black, pink, black, black, gold. And I'm going from left to right and from bottom to top because I am right-handed. And if you're left-handed, you would just do the opposite direction. So you'll tie your knot on the rightmost strand, and then you'll go from right to left. So here's my second row, and I'm going to position a bead in each of the vertical slots like the first row. And this time I'm going to pull to bring all of my vertical warp threads together so that the spaces will be the same as the size of the beads. And then I'm going to put my needle again over all of the warp threads and through each bead. So I just try to keep my needle up and over and pull. So when you go over to the left side, you just need to pull again, and this time it should feel a lot more secure. So before we keep going, I'd like to talk about a couple of things. First is how to determine how long you want to make your beaded piece. So basically you want to stop short an inch shorter than your final desired length of bracelet. So if I want to have a 6-inch bracelet, then I want to make the beaded section 5 inches. And if you want to have a 7-inch bracelet, then you want to make your beaded section 6 inches, and that is because the clasp will be an extra inch. So I'm just gonna measure my wrist, and my wrist size is 5.5 inches, and so I would like personally to have a 6-inch bracelet, so I'm only gonna be beading up until 5 inches like this. But for this project only, I want to talk about something that might affect the length of the beaded section, and that is these ribbon clamps. So if you remember, in our last project we used the wider set of ribbon clamps that came with the kit on this project, on this bracelet, and the kit only came with 2 sets, so this wider one and a set of these narrower ones. However, if I line up these narrower ribbon clamps, so if I line them up with the beads, it's gonna show that the ribbon clamp barely covers 5 in a row. So this is definitely too small to fit the width of all 7 beads. So I don't really want to deal with what happened in the last video where I was trying to shove in the extra edge weaving into the ribbon clamp. That was just overall a really frustrating experience. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to take it in from 7 to 5. So I'm gonna do a decrease, but I'm also gonna take in these edges and just decrease it to 5 beads. And I'm gonna show you how to do that later on. But for now, just keep that in mind, that I'm gonna be adding a row of just 5 on either end. So with that being said, you can just go ahead and continue to follow this pattern and keep weaving. And if you cut a shorter length of thread, go to part 4 of my previous tutorial series. I titled it as adding thread and tying off ends. So the adding thread part will show you how to add more thread if you run out of thread in the middle. But as I said, I cut myself a ridiculously long piece of weft thread so that I wouldn't have to do that, hopefully, until the very end.